Hello, BookTube. Starting in late March and throughout April, I felt an urge to return to history. For several years, starting in 2020, history became my favorite genre to read. However, over the last year and a half, my attentions have turned to manga. However, in late March and in early April, I got burnt out on manga. I overindulged. And so I felt an urge to pick up more history and wanted to see if history would return to favor. I kind of, this idea overtook me to such an extent that I removed one of the bookcases in the little manga room and moved it in here to add more space to history. Ultimately, that bookcase is now currently with the classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama section of my library over there. So anyway, but I did pick up 10 works of history over the course of April. And I'm going to begin where my recent fiction and poetry haul ended, which is with the University of Chicago Press. Originally, this first book I had planned to buy from Amazon, which features quite heavily in this haul. But I got an email from the University of Chicago Press. I am subscribed to their newsletter, and there was a 40% off sale for this book, and I immediately jumped on it. It also gave me the excuse to pick up a selected edition of Durs Grunbein's poetry. So the book I'm talking about is Inventing the Renaissance, The Myth of a Golden Age by Ada Palmer, who is most famous for her science fiction novels. So, an irreverent new take on the Renaissance, which reveals it as anything but Europe's golden age. From the darkness of a plagued and war-torn Middle Ages, the Renaissance, we're told, heralds the dawning of a new world, a halcyon age of art, prosperity, and rebirth. Hogwash, or so says award-winning novelist and historian Ada Palmer. In Inventing the Renaissance, Palmer turns her witty and irreverent eye on the fantasies we've told ourselves about Europe's not-so-golden age. Myths she sets right with sharp clarity. Palmer's Renaissance is altogether desperate. Troubled by centuries of conflict, she argues, Europe looked to a long-lost Roman Empire, even its education practices, to save them from unending war. Later historians met their own political challenges with a similarly nostalgic vision, only now they look to the Renaissance and told a partial story. To right this wrong, Palmer offers 15 provocative portraits of Renaissance men and women, some famous, some obscure, whose lines reveal a far more diverse, fragile, and wild Renaissance than its glowing reputation suggests. So, really looking forward to this. I'll try to get to it relatively soon. It is 700 pages, so I will have to sort of plan my reading around this book. So the next 3 books I pre-ordered from Amazon because they offer publication day delivery or release day delivery sometimes. And 2 of them I'd had my eye on for a while. The third has come highly recommended. So let's get started with them. First up is The Last Dynasty, Ancient Egypt from Alexander the Great to Cleopatra by Toby Wilkinson. So this is a history of the Ptolemaic dynasty. I have read it and I like it. It's pretty good. One of the world's leading Egyptologists tells the rich and fascinating story of ancient Egypt's last dynasty. Alexander the Great and Cleopatra may be two of the most famous figures from the ancient world, but the Egyptian era, bookended by their lives, the Ptolemaic period, 305 to 30 BC, is little known. In the last dynasty, New York Times bestselling author Toby Wilkinson unravels the incredible story of this turbulent era, bringing to life 3 centuries worth of extraordinary moments and charismatic figures. Macedonian in origin and Greek-speaking, the Ptolemies presided over the final flourishing of pharaonic civilization. Wilkinson describes the extraordinary cultural reach displayed at the height of their power, how they founded new cities, including Alexandria, their great seaside residence and commercial capital, mined gold in the furthest reaches of Nubia, built spectacular new temples that are among the foremost architectural wonders of the Nile Valley, and created a dazzling civilization that produced astonishing works of sculpture, architecture, and literature. Stunningly, he also shows how such expansionist ambitions led to the era's downfall. The Ptolemaic period was a time when ancient Egypt turned its gaze westward, in the process becoming the unwitting handmaid to the inexorable rise of Rome and the consequent loss of Egyptian independence. So, pretty good. Although, I think instead of turning west, it probably should have been north, because Greece and Rome are both north of Egypt. But again, I rather liked the last dynasty. Next up in a new release from yesterday, as well the next book, is The Golden Road, How Ancient India Transformed the World by William Dalrymple. A soaring history of India's unrecognized role in producing the world as we know it. For a millennium and a half, India was a confident exporter of its diverse civilization, creating around it a vast empire of ideas. Indian art, religions, technology, astronomy, music, dance, literature, mathematics, and mythology blazed a trail across the world, along a golden road that stretched from the Red Sea to the Pacific. In the Golden Road, William Dalrymple draws from a lifetime of scholarship to highlight India's oft-forgotten position as the heart of ancient Eurasia. For the first time, he gives a name to this spread of Indian ideas that transformed the world. From the largest Hindu temple in the world at Angkor Wat to the Buddhism of China, from the trade that helped fund the Roman Empire to the creation of the numerals we use today, including zero, India transformed the culture and technology of its ancient world, and our world as we know it. So I'm definitely thinking of reading this book in May. Although first I will put all of these books up and then browse my shelves to determine my May reading plan. So next up is The Fate of the Day, The War for America, from Fort Ticonderoga to Charleston, 1777 to 1780. Volume 2 of the Revolutionary Trilogy by Rick Atkinson. So this work has been highly recommended by Steve Donahue, among other history-oriented booktubers. Okay. This book is so new it does not want to cooperate in doing this. Excuse me. In the second volume of the landmark American Revolution trilogy by the Pulitzer Prize-winning and #1 New York Times bestselling author of The British Are Coming, George Washington's army fights on the knife edge between victory and defeat. The first 21 months of the American Revolution, which began at Lexington and ended at Princeton, was the story of a ragged group of militiamen and soldiers fighting to forge a new nation. By the winter of 1777, the exhausted Continental Army could claim only that it had barely escaped annihilation by the world's most formidable fighting force. 2 years into the war, King George III is as determined as ever to bring his rebellious colonies to heel. But the king's task is now far more complicated. Fighting a determined enemy on the other side of the Atlantic has become ruinously expensive, and spies tell him that the French and Spanish are threatening to join forces with the Americans. Prize-winning historian Rick Atkinson provides a riveting narrative covering the middle years of the Revolution. Stationed in Paris, Benjamin Franklin woos the French. In Pennsylvania, George Washington pleads with Congress to deliver the money, men, and material he needs to continue the fight. In New York, General William Howe, the commander of the greatest army the British has ever sent overseas, plans a new campaign against the Americans, even as he is no longer certain that he can win this searing, bloody war. The months and years that follow bring epic battles at Brandywine, Saratoga, Monmouth, and Charleston, an infamous winter of misery at Valley Forge, and yet more appeals for sacrifice by every American committed to the struggle for freedom. Time to coincide with the 250th anniversary of the beginning of the Revolution, Atkinson's brilliant account of the lethal conflict between the Americans and the British offers not only deeply researched and spectacularly dramatic history, but also a new perspective on the demands that a democracy makes on its citizens. So, you might be wondering, wait a minute, you don't have Volume 1, do you? Well, part of my recent order with pals, most of which was in the Fiction and Poetry Hall, actually included 2 works of history. One of which is The British Are Coming, The War for America, Lexington to Princeton, 1775 to 1777, by Rick Atkinson. So I've read this one before from my library, and I remember rather liking it, although I ran out of steam with it at some point. So, let's begin again. From the best-selling author of the Liberation Trilogy comes the extraordinary first volume of his new trilogy about the American Revolution. In June 1773, King George III attended a grand celebration of his reign over the greatest, richest empire since ancient Rome. Less than 2 years later, Britain's bright future turned dark. After a series of provocations, the king's soldiers took up arms against his rebellious colonies in America. The war would last 8 years, and though at least 1 in 10 of the Americans who fought for independence would die for that cause, the prize was valuable beyond measure: freedom from oppression and the creation of a new republic. Rick Atkinson, author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning An Army at Dawn and 2 other superb books about World War II, has long been admired for his unparalleled ability to write deeply researched, stunningly vivid narrative history. Now he turns his attention to a new war, and in the initial volume of the Revolution Trilogy, he tells the story of the first 21 months of America's violent effort to forge a new nation. From the battles at Lexington and Concord in spring 1775 to those at Trenton and Princeton in winter 1776 to 1777, American militiamen and then the ragged Continental Army take on the world's most formidable fighting force and struggle to avoid annihilation. It is a gripping saga alive with astonishing characters. Henry Knox, the former bookseller with an uncanny understanding of artillery, Nathaniel Greene, the blue-eyed bumpkin who becomes one of America's greatest battle captains, Benjamin Franklin, the self-made man who proves himself the nation's wiliest diplomat, George Washington, the commander-in-chief who learns the difficult art of leadership when the war seems all but lost. The story is also told from the British perspective. We see the fight through their eyes and down their gun barrels, which makes the moral conflict between the redcoats and the rebels all the more compelling. Full of riveting details and untold stories, The British Are Coming is a tale of heroes and knaves, of sacrifice and blunder, of redemption and profound suffering. Rick Atkinson has given stirring new life to the first act of our country's creation drama. So, in addition to the British are coming, I also picked up Washington, A Life by Ron Chernow, which is a biography of George Washington. Celebrated biographer Ron Chernow provides a richly nuanced portrait of the father of our nation, with a breadth and depth matched by no other one-volume life of Washington. This crisply paced narrative carries the reader through his adventurous early years, his heroic exploits with the Continental Army, his presiding over the Continental Convention, and his magnificent performance as America's first president. In this groundbreaking book, based on massive research, Chernow shatters forever the stereotype of a stolid and emotional man and brings to vivid life a dashing, passionate man of fiery opinions and many moods. With a dramatic sweep worthy of its subject, Washington is a magisterial work from one of our most elegant storytellers. So the next 4 books I ordered all at once from Amazon earlier this month. First up is The Power and the Glory, Life in the English Country House Before the Great War by Adrian Tinniswood, which I have also read. And it's okay. It's not as good as Noble Ambitions, Tinniswood's earlier work. For generations, the great palaces of Britain were home to living histories, noble families that had reigned for centuries. But by the end of the 19th century, members of elite society found themselves for the first time in the company of arrivistes. Their new neighbors, from chorus girls to millionaire greengrocers to guano impresarios, lacked lineage and were unencumbered by the weight of tradition. In The Power and the Glory, historian Adrian Tinniswood reconstructs life in the country house during its golden age before the Great War, when Britain ruled over a quarter of the Earth's population, and the stately homes were at their most opulent. But change was on the horizon. The landed classes were being forced to grapple not only with new neighbors, but also with new social norms and expectations. An exuberant story, The Power and the Glory offers a delicious, captivating, and often scandalous history of the British country house. Not so much scandalous, but still I liked it. Next up is To Overthrow the World, The Rise and Fall and Rise of Communism by Sean McMeekin. When the USSR collapsed in 1991, the world was certain communism was dead. Today, 3 decades later, it is clear that communism is not. While Russia may no longer be communist, communist influence and sympathy for communist ideas have proliferated across the globe. In To Overthrow the World, Sean McMeekin investigates the evolution of communism from its seductive ideal of a classless society into the ruling doctrine of tyrannical regimes. Tracing communism's ascent from theory to practice, McMeekin ranges from Karl Marx's writings to the rise and fall of the USSR under Stalin, to Mao's rise to power in China, to the acceleration of communist or communist-inspired policies around the world in the 21st century. McMeekin argues, however, that despite the endurance of communism, it remains deeply unpopular as a political form. Where it has arisen, it has always arisen by force. Blending historical narrative with cutting-edge scholarship, To Overthrow the World revolutionizes our understanding of the evolution of communism, an idea that seemingly cannot die. So, To Overthrow the World. Next up is Summer of Fire and Blood, The German Peasants' War by Lyndal Roper. Excuse me. The German Peasants' War was the greatest popular uprising in Western Europe before the French Revolution. In 1524 and 1525, it swept across Germany with astonishing speed, as well over 100,000 people massed in armed bands to demand a new and more egalitarian order. The peasants took control of vast areas of southern and middle Germany, torching and plundering the monasteries, convents, and castles that stood in their way. But they proved no match for the forces of the lords, who put down the revolt by slaying somewhere between 70 and 100,000 peasants in just over 2 months. In Summer of Fire and Blood, the first history of the German Peasants' War in a generation, historian Lyndal exposes the far-reaching ramifications of this rebellion. Though the war's victors portrayed the uprising as naive and inchoate, Roper reveals a mass movement that sought to make good on the radical potential of the Protestant Reformation. By recovering what the people themselves felt and believed, Summer of Fire and Blood reconstructs the thrilling, tragic story of the peasants' fight to change the world. So, I will probably try to get this one relatively soon for Historathon. Although I may not be keeping myself strictly to Historathon. And finally, The Eagle and the Hart, The Tragedy of Richard II and Henry IV by Helen Castor. I'll just focus on the front flap. The epic dual biography of Richard II and Henry IV, two cousins whose lives played out in extraordinary parallel until Henry deposed the tyrant Richard and declared himself King of England. Richard of Bordeaux and Henry of Bolingbroke, cousins born just 3 months apart, were 10 years old when Richard became King of England. They were 32 when Henry deposed him and became king in his place. Now the story behind one of the strangest and most fateful events in English history, and the inspiration behind Shakespeare's most celebrated history plays, is brought to vivid life by the acclaimed author of Blood and Roses, Helen Castor. Richard had birthright on his side and a profound belief in his own God-given majesty. But beyond that, he lacked all qualities of leadership. A narcissist who did not understand or accept the principles that underpinned his rule, he was neither a warrior defending his kingdom nor a lawgiver whose justice protected his people. Instead, he declared that his laws were in his own mouth and acted accordingly. He sought to define as treason any resistance to his will and recruited a private army loyal to himself rather than the realm, and he intended to destroy those who tried to restrain him. Henry was everything Richard was not, a leader who inspired both loyalty and friendship, a soldier and a chivalric hero, dutiful, responsible, principled. After years of tension and conflict, Richard banished him and seized his vast inheritance. Richard had been crowned a king, but he had become a tyrant, and as a tyrant, ruling by arbitrary will rather than established law, he was deposed by his cousin Henry, the only possible candidate to take his place. Henry was welcomed as a liberator, a champion of the people against his predecessor's paranoid despotism. But within months he too was facing rebellion. Men knew that a deposer could in turn be deposed, and the new king found himself buffeted by unrest and chronic ill health until he seemed a shadow of his former self. Trapped by political uncertainty and troubled by these signs that God might not, after all, endorse his actions. So I will definitely be aiming to read The Eagle and the Hart in May for Historathon. So, those were all, except for The Last Dynasty, rather big books. So I will not be doing a Steve Pyramid. So I don't know if there is going to be a similarly large history-oriented haul in the coming months. I have one work of history next month in May and one in June. and then in August and December. So I don't know what else I will be picking up, if anything, or how exactly I should be doing these, if I should haul them as they come in or wait until I have a pretty sizable stack to haul. So I will figure it out in the coming months, and will haul as I will haul. But anyway, BookTube, I need to go ahead and put these books up and get ready for my May reading plan. So until I see you tomorrow with that, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.